Good evening, everyone. Thank you very much for being here and welcome once again to Bhagavad-gita Satsang. I'm Hari-kirtana Das, and as always, it is a great pleasure for me to be here with you, an honor to have you here with me. And as is our usual habit, I will now ask you to raise your hands if you can hear the words coming out of my mouth and going into this microphone. Yay, hands up. Thank you very much. You may lower all of your hands. I feel confident now that the word is out. The word is getting out. At least my words are getting out to you, and that's very reassuring. Let's take care of our usual housekeeping while we're at it. For those of you who are new to the satsang, you can adjust your audio settings and your video options up in the upper right-hand corner. You need not worry about your microphone or your video camera because while you can see and or hear me, I cannot see or hear you. However, if you would like to be heard, simply type a question or a comment into the Q&A box. I have that open in the corner of my screen, and I will do my best to keep an eye on it and answer your questions in as real time as I possibly can. Last week, in chapter 10, the Yoga of Divine Presence, or the Yoga of Divine Opulences, Vibhutis, we spoke about how Krishna can be seen represented in various sages and singers, horses and elephants, cows and snakes, birds and beasts, rivers and warriors, purifiers, and sciences. So Krishna is giving Arjuna, and by extension us, a wide variety of ways by which we can see manifestations of his presence, either directly or indirectly, literally or representationally, in the material world. And by so doing, Krishna makes himself accessible to us who are covered with material elements, and therefore having material senses, we can only see the material world until such time as our consciousness is sufficiently purified as to be able to see spirit through spiritual eyes, or to experience our spiritual nature and the spiritual nature of everything through the agency of spiritual senses. And seeing Krishna in all these different ways is an integral part of the system, of the process by which our senses regain their own natural spiritual quality and capabilities. So we covered verses 26 through 32 last time. This evening, we will continue to discuss, Krishna actually will continue to discuss himself as being the best in all categories. And also in this section, we will find how Krishna speaks of himself as either being or being represented by the essential nature of all things. The Sanskrit word dharma means, among other things, the essential nature of something. And Krishna will identify himself as being identical with the essential nature of several things that we will read about in tonight's verses, which are 33 through 38. We will also take a close look at verse 34, where Krishna speaks about how he appears as feminine qualities, and we'll take a close look at that. He will also speak about morality and its relationship to victory, silence, and wisdom. I'm also going to do something a little different this evening. Usually I work with my own translations that I put together based on my reading of about a half dozen different editions of the Bhagavad-gita. Tonight, I'm going to refer to two translations, neither of which are my own. I will refer to the translations that appear in Bhagavad-gita as it is by A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Prabhupada, and I will also refer to translations that appear on the website Bhagavad-gita.org, where we find commentary on most of the verses by all four of the Vaishnava Sampradayas, or the lineages that look at the Bhagavad Gita through a lens of various kinds of duality as opposed to absolute non-duality. And we'll compare these two translations and look at some of the commentaries from two of these lineages in the personages of Madhvacharya and Ramanuja. So that's our MO for this evening, just so you know. We will also make a little bit of a change from previous classes, or at least recent previous classes. We are going to return to the invocation mantra that we have been chanting, or the first invocation mantra that we started chanting a while back. I had reason to change the invocation mantra based on the content of the verses that we were studying. And now for that same reason, I'm coming back to our one-line mantra. So for those of you who are new to the transliterated Sanskrit, the Sanskrit written out in the Roman alphabet with diacritical marks as pronunciation cues, the dot over an M indicates that one presses the back of one's tongue to the back of the roof of one's mouth at the same time one brings one's lips together out front. The bar across the top of a vowel indicates an elongated and open version of that vowel, as opposed to a short and more staccato version of the same vowel, in this case, the A's in Vasudevaya. The A's in Bhagavate are more like the U in but, so shorter A's. So I will chant this mantra, and you will chant it back. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. Om Namo Bhagavate Vasudevaya. I offer my respects to the Supreme Person, who is the all-pervading transcendence. So the person indicated by the word Vasudev will show up this evening in one of our verses, hence my referring back to this invocation mantra. So we left off last week with the 32nd verse, O Arjuna, of creations I am the beginning, the end, and the middle as well. Of sciences, I am the science of the self-realization. Well, I didn't take that typo out, so. And among logicians, I am the conclusive truth. We spoke a little bit about creation, maintenance, and destruction. The idea that the incarnations of the material qualities concerned with creation, maintenance, and destruction in the material world are ultimately coming from the one supreme person. So we spoke about Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the maintainer, Shiva, the destroyer. This idea of how Krishna is identified both with these particular deities and also with time. Creation, maintenance, and destruction are the features of time, or how time manifests in the material world. So Krishna is going to come back to these ideas in subsequent verses and put a little different or more specific spin on things. So I'm going to read through our verses for this evening, 33 through 38, and then we will come back to looking at each of these verses in detail. And I'm just going to read the one translation of each of these verses from Bhagavad-gita as it is this time through. And then as we look in detail, we will look at a different translation coming from Bhagavad-gita.org. So verse 33. Of letters, I am the letter A, and among compound words, I am the dual compound. I am also inexhaustible time, and of creators, I am Brahma. Text 34. I am all devouring death, and I am the generating principle of all that is yet to be. Among women, I am fame, fortune, fine speech, memory, intelligence, steadfastness, and patience. Text 35. Of the hymns in the Sama Veda, I am the Brihat Sama, and of poetry, I am the Gayatri Mantra. Of months, I am Margashirsha, November and December, and of seasons, I am flower-bearing spring. Text 36. I am also the gambling of cheats, and I am the splendid of the splendor. Oh, I'm sorry, and of the splendid, I am the splendor. This is what happens when I try to read without my glasses. I am victory, I am adventure, and I am the strength of the strong. Text 37. Of the descendants of Vrishni, I am Vasudeva, and of the Pandavas, I am Arjuna. Of the sages, I am Vyas, and among great thinkers, I am Ushana. Text 38. Among all means of suppressing lawlessness, I am punishment, and of those who seek victory, I am morality. Of secret things, I am silence, and of the wise, I am the wisdom. Okay, so those are our verses for this evening. So now let's look at them in some detail. So again, the translation of verse 33. Of letters, I am the letter A, or more properly, the letter A, because we're not talking about the letter A in the English language, but rather in Sanskrit. And among compound words, I am the dual compound. I am also inexhaustible time, and of creators, I am Brahma. So, the other translation that we can look at, of letters, I am the first letter, A, or A. So here the emphasis on the translation is the idea of first, the beginning. Akara is the first letter of the Sanskrit alphabet, and it's the beginning of Vedic literature. The idea here is that without this sound, no other sound can happen. You need as the seed sound of all other sounds. Therefore, this one indispensable sound is Krishna, just as Krishna is the one indispensable attribute of reality. We are all contingent beings. We could be or we could not be. But Krishna is not a contingent being, which is to say that while our existence depends on the existence of Krishna, Krishna is completely independent and therefore does not depend on our existence for his existence. Continuing with the second translation, and of compound words, the dual word. So I am not a Sanskrit scholar. So I had to look up a little bit about, well, what exactly, in fact, actually, I'm not even an English scholar. I am barely fluent in English, and therefore I really had no idea what this meant. So the dual compound, for those of you who are also not Sanskrit or English scholars, is a compound where both the terms in the compound, both sides of this combination, are equal in both substance and structure. So for the example, the classical example that's given is Rama-Krishna. That's a dual word, and it's called a dvandva. So in this compound word, each of the two words has the same form, and therefore it's called a dual compound. And also each of them occupies an equal position both grammatically and substantively. When we talk about Rama and Krishna together, there is equality of substance. And we already spoke about Rama in our last class and how Krishna is both the incarnation Ram that is described in the pastimes of Ram, the Ramayan, but also another Ram, Parshuram, an incarnation who is an expert wielder of weapons. And yet another Ram is about to show up. So there's lots of Rama going on in this chapter. So that's the explanation of the dual compound, to the extent that I'm able to comprehend such things. Continuing with our second translation, I am eternal, ever-flowing time, pretty much the same as the first translation. I am also inexhaustible time. And the four-faced Brahma, whereas this translation says, and of creators I am Brahma. So this second translation is a little more literal insofar as the term being translated is Vishvata Mukha, the four-faced. And then Dhata is another name for Brahma. So Brahma is easily identified as the chief of the demigods who has four heads facing in four different directions. So Brahma is considered to be actually a secondary creator, which is to say that Krishna is ultimately responsible for all three aspects of time in creation, maintenance, and destruction. But according to Vedic cosmology, Krishna expands himself into various Vishnu incarnation or Vishnu forms, and then outsources the manufacturing of the universe to one especially empowered being named Brahma. And if there is no Atma or Jiva, in other words, someone like you or I, who is qualified to engage in this responsibility, then Krishna will assume the role of Brahma himself in any given universe, in any of the infinite or uncountable numbers of times that universes come into being. You may have some questions about some of this. And if you do, pop them into the Q&A box, and I will do my level best to come up with a satisfactory answer for you. Meanwhile, we will move on to the verse that we will chant together this evening. So I'll go into a little more detail on the diacritical marks. A dot under the R indicates the R as a vowel in Sanskrit. So it's a R sound. So you're really just flicking the tip of your tongue off of the edge of the cliff at behind your top teeth. So you're not bringing your top teeth to your bottom lip, but rather you're flicking your tongue as if you were going to trill the R, ra, or re. The accent mark over an S indicates an SH sound all the way in the back of your mouth, as opposed to just a regular SH sound that we might make in the word she. This would be she. So a low-pitched pink noise sound from the back of your mouth rather than a high-pitched white noise sound closer to the front of your mouth. The dot under an S is a regular SH sound, the same way we would pronounce it in English. Dot under the N indicates that that N is pronounced further back. So instead of an N sound with the front of your tongue against the back of your top teeth, this is going to put the middle of your tongue back against the back portion of the roof of your mouth. So it's more of a nasal sound, as opposed to And that'll do it. You do not need to pay too much attention to the dots under the H, because there's a grammatical rule where the dot under the H will mean that the vowel that precedes that H will be echoed back in a short form of that vowel, but only if the dot under the H appears at the end of a word, at the end of a line. And in this verse, that does not occur. So in this case, you just make a short stop on that vowel. So here we go. I chant one line at a time. You chant each line back. Mrityu sarva haraschaham. Oh, see, clearly I forgot something. The C is a CH sound, cha. If you want a K sound, you get a K. You want an S sound, you get an S, like sarva or kirti in the third line. So a C is used to indicate a CH sound. And if you see a C, an H after a C, then you would put some additional air on it. So it would be cha and cha. So I'll do the first line again, you chant it back. Mrityu sarva hadaschaham. Udbhavascha bhavishyatam. Kirti shrir vakshanirinam. Smritir medha driti kshama. All right. Translation: I am all devouring death, and I am the generating principle of all that is yet to be. Among women, I am fame, fortune, fine speech, memory, intelligence, steadfastness, and patience. So let's look at the other translation that we're playing with this evening. I am all devouring death. Also the six manifestations of all living entities. I am the first as birth. Oh, I'm sorry. Also, of the 6 manifestations of all living entities, I am the first as birth. Of feminine attributes, I am fame, beauty, perfect speech, memory, intellect, patience, and compassion. So this is a little different. Kshama is translated as compassion, dhriti as patience, as opposed to steadfastness and patience in the first translation. So let's spend a little extra time with this one. So the 6 manifestations of all living entities are coming into being, growth, maintenance for some time, reproduction, decline, and then going out of being. So Krishna here, in one translation, we have, I am all devouring death and the generating principle of all that is yet to be. And in this way, in kind of reverse order, the translation covers all of these principles of 6 principles of all living entities in the material world. So mrityu is the Sanskrit word for death. So we begin with I am all devouring death. Then the generating principle of all that is yet to be is the first of the 6 manifestations of all living entities. So all devouring death, kind of the dark side of God. Through the agency of time, which no one can stop, eventually all things go out of being. And then we come back into being. According to yoga philosophy, this is a cyclical process of repeated birth and death. One of the questions I get asked a lot, and you may have wondered about this as well, is if samsara, the cycle of repeated birth and death, is true, that we are eternal spiritual beings taking birth according to our karma and dying and taking birth again, etc., why do we not remember our past lives? And the traditional commentators explain this as death is all devouring. And even though our subtle body of mind, intelligence, and ego acts as a vehicle for the Atma, the spiritual person, to ride to the next physical body, the body made of gross material elements, earth, water, fire, air, and ether, the shock of leaving one's body is such that memory of that life is lost. There are impressions, samskaras, impressions in the mind that travel with us. And in some cases, it is possible that elements of memory from a past life show up, surface. But for the most part, the overwhelming majority of times for living entities, the memory of past lives is erased by the shock of the departure of the spirit soul from the material body. So that's the explanation as to why we do not remember past lives. And this is a distinction between Krishna and all other beings. In the 4th chapter, Arjuna makes the inquiry about how Krishna could have taught this same science of yoga to the sun god in the beginning, when Arjuna has known Krishna for their entire lives practically, and therefore knows that the appearance of the sun god precedes Krishna's appearance by millions of years. And Krishna's explanation is that we have passed through many births, you and I. I remember all of them, but you don't. And that's because I'm the Supreme Being and you are not. I'm all-knowing, omniscient, and it is not your nature to be omniscient. It's my nature to be omniscient. So because we do not have this capacity for omniscience, and because we are subject to the laws of material nature, which is also something Krishna is not, then the tendency, the overwhelming tendency, is to have memories of past lives knocked out of our system upon the departure of the soul from the body. So the next portion of the verse, and I really like the way this is translated in the first version. I am the generating principle of all that is yet to be. So what strikes me here is how Krishna is not just the coming into being, the maintenance and the destruction of all things, but the potential for something to come into being. Prior to it coming into being, just the very potential for something to be is Krishna. So that's something a little more subtle. I'm going to share something with you that was a very nice way for me to think about this earlier today. So this is an Instagram post by one of my friends. And I was looking at this beautiful video of this beautiful place. If I remember correctly, this is somewhere in Florida. And I was just watching the energy flow of the ripples and the undulations of the ocean here. And I was appreciating how so many different directions, how the energy is flowing in so many different directions here. And that there are big waves, and then little waves, and then smaller waves. Very interesting sort of example of fractal geometry, of self-similarity of patterns in nature. And I thought about how in each of these undulations, that undulation has the potential to come into being, and then it comes into being and it moves through time, and then it goes out of. And then it manifests, the energy manifests again in a different way. And then within each major undulation, there are all these little things going on that also are the same kind of shape. And if you were to look at them very closely, you would see that they're so similar. And those also come into being. They have the potential to come into being. They come into being, they stay for just a fragment of time, and then they go out of being. And I was awestruck by the complexity and the beauty of how all of this is moving. And I thought about how Krishna is the potential for all of this to happen, and then the happening itself, and then the not happening. So I watched this for a nice long time this morning, just appreciating how Krishna was present in this beautiful example of the natural world. And that's kind of the point of this chapter, is to give us impetus to connect with Krishna, to be conscious of Krishna when we look at the amazing stuff of the material world, and to notice just how amazing it really is. The natural world is just mind-blowingly amazing and beautiful and powerful and far out. So I thought about that when I thought about this verse, when I noticed that particular post, and I thought I would share it with you. All right, let's talk about the 7 feminine qualities. I'm not exactly sure why these are understood to be feminine qualities. But whether a man has them or a woman has them, male or female, doesn't matter, they are understood to be feminine qualities. And let's look at the first one too again. Among women, I am fame and fortune. And the other verse here is pretty much the same of feminine attributes. I am fame, and in this case it says beauty. So Shri is translated here as beauty, whereas in the other translation it is fortune. Both are correct. Shri as an honorific indicates someone who has opulences or is beautiful. Shri also is an indication of the goddess of fortune. So the beautiful image, as Tess has attested to, that we were looking at before, can be said to be Shri, beautiful, but also because it has power and because it's big. It also is Shri because it's very opulent. So fortune is considered a feminine quality, and hence the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi Devi, is known as Shri. This also shows up, this word Shri also shows up in Bhagavad-gita every time Krishna speaks. Shri Bhagavan Uvacha, indicating one who is blessed with unlimited opulences. And who is the giver of the opulences? Shri herself, the goddess of fortune. So here's what this verse does not indicate, especially these first two feminine attributes. This does not indicate that, in Krishna's opinion, women naturally seek fame and fortune in some small or even pejorative sense of selfishness or self-absorption. It does not indicate that women are naturally male-identified seekers of men who are rich and famous. Just to get that out of the way, just to be clear that this is not some indication that women seek fame and fortune in some superficial or frivolous way, but rather fame and fortune are themselves feminine qualities. And when a man pursues them or when a woman pursues them, they're still understood to be feminine qualities. And the acquisition of fame and fortune simply cannot happen without the blessings of the goddess of fortune, Lakshmi Devi. All right, so the next two, fine speech and memory, translated here as perfect speech and memory. So interestingly, fine speech and memory are functions of a very healthy throat chakra. This energy center right at the base of our throats is where the ability, when this is balanced, then we have the ability to articulate our thoughts and feelings very clearly. We can be honest, truthful about our thoughts and feelings, tactful about expressing our thoughts and feelings. And memory comes from hearing very nicely. So this is actually the energy center associated with hearing nicely, attentiveness. I was in a workshop with a yoga teacher who talked about how so often we don't remember so much of our lives. And the reason he gave for our not retaining memories of so much of our lives is that we weren't there when they happened. That is to say, we weren't fully present. Our minds were not fully engaged with the moment-to-moment activity. Our minds were somewhere else while our life was kind of on autopilot, and therefore our memory is not sound. Whereas when we're fully engaged with something, fully present in the moment, we are far more likely to retain a robust memory of that event. So the ability to speak very nicely, and also the ability to be fully present in order to retain an impression of an experience, and the retention of the experience itself, are both considered to be feminine qualities. The next word is intellect, or intelligence. In Sanskrit, there are several different words for intelligence. Up to this point, the word buddhi has been used to indicate the power of discernment between spirit and matter, or spiritual intelligence, long-term goal-directed spiritual intelligence, where the direction is towards self-understanding. So that's one kind of intelligence, buddhi. The word used in this verse, however, is not buddhi, it is medha. So medha is a different kind of intelligence. So medha means wide-ranging knowledge of many subjects and the understanding of how to apply them in combination. So the capacity for integration of knowledge and the practical application of integrated knowledge is what medha means. And again, this particular kind of intelligence, this ability to integrate different ideas, put different elements of knowledge together and then do something practical with that knowledge, that combination of elements of knowledge. That's medha, and that's understood to be a feminine quality. Then, steadfastness and patience, or patience and compassion. So we have a couple of different ways of looking at this. In Ramanuja's commentary, Ramanuja is the Acharya for the Sri Vaishnava Sampradaya. He speaks about Dhriti and Kshama as fortitude and forgiveness. So steadfastness, another name for fortitude, means to be firm in the face of circumstances that might otherwise cause one to falter or be blown off course, to stay on course, even under circumstances that might otherwise distract one or undermine one's determination to go in a particular direction. So that's what is meant by the word dhriti. Same root as drishti, or vision, point of focus. So similar. The ability to stay focused, even amidst distractions, is a feminine quality. And then patience or forgiveness. So Sanskrit is a complex language, and words have multiple meanings and deep meanings. So patience here doesn't just mean passively waiting without being disturbed. It doesn't mean getting online and then not being disturbed by the fact that the line's not moving. It means being humble even when one is exceptionally qualified. It means being not just tolerant of others, but compassionate towards others. Forgiveness is a function of compassion. You know, when you're angry at someone, you're just thinking about them as the source of your misery, and therefore you get angry. When you change your framing of the situation so that you have some empathy for the person who is the source of your misery, and appreciate their own suffering that has resulted in them causing you misery, then it's a little bit easier to be forgiving. So patience in this sense indicates that kind of compassion or ability to tolerate or to empathize rather with other people. Now, in terms of being humble, even when exceptionally qualified, ladies, I'm sure you are familiar with the phenomenon of being in a group of men, making a suggestion, having them dismiss it, or maybe even not even acknowledge it, and then having one of those men make the exact same suggestion and all the other guys saying, yeah, that's a great idea, when it was your idea in the first place. You may also have experienced or have the talent for making men think that your idea was their idea and therefore getting their buy-in on it, even though it was your idea. If any of you have, ladies in the audience this evening, have ever had either of those experiences, please raise your hands. I'm guessing that this will sound a little familiar to most of you. Yes, I see some hands going up, yeah. So there are obvious social problems with the absence of recognition for the quality of one's work, the quality of one's intelligence that is in play when women come up with really good ideas. And yet, this particular skill has its practical application. Sometimes it's just necessary. I read an article not too long ago where the German Chancellor, Angela Merkel, was characterized as someone who was extremely adept at working with male heads of state and members of her own government in such a way as to let them feel like they were getting credit for stuff. And we find in the Tao Te Ching by Lao Tzu, one of the characteristics of great leaders is they make all their followers think, we did it, as opposed to taking credit. So this is a feminine attribute. The humility, so often so lacking in men, to not just have to take credit for everything, not seeking recognition. This is also a devotional, spiritual quality. In fact, all of these are devotional, spiritual qualities. The idea of not seeking fame and fortune, even when fame and fortune is justly deserved, not trying to attract followers by virtue of one's accomplishments. etc. Anyway, if you have any questions about this verse, we still have plenty to go in the last 10 minutes of our time together, but I wanted to especially focus on that verse because issues with theological spirituality and women, I think due to our current and also due to past social conditions, deserve a little extra attention, and so I wanted that attention to be there. But if you have any questions about what we discussed so far, please go ahead and ask. Our next of the last three verses we're going to speak about this evening, verse 35. Of the hymns in the Sama Veda, I am the Brihat Sama, and of poetry, I am Gayatri. Of months, I am Margashirsha, November and December, and of seasons, I am flower-bearing spring. So there's a significant difference in the translation that I have from Bhagavad-gita.org. Of the Sama Veda hymns, I am the Brihat Sama, that's the same. Also of mantras composed in poetic meter, I am the Gayatri. Same idea, specifying mantras composed in poetic meter as opposed to just poetry. I am the harvest month in the fall. So in the first translation, what we heard was a very specific couple of months, November and December. And in America, that doesn't sound like harvest time. Usually we think of October, maybe even September, October, or October, November, as late as it would get for harvest time. Well, in India, November and December is harvest time. In America, it's going to be earlier, from the end of September in through the end of October, it would usually be. So the idea is not that it's a specific month on the calendar, but that it's the month of harvesting, the month where everyone is happy because the fruits of their summer-long labor are now being realized in the form of what will sustain everyone for the winter. Let's backtrack just a little bit. The Sama Veda, one of the Vedas, there are four, is the Veda where one finds beautiful songs, hymns essentially, and one of those songs is the Brihat Sama. Brihat means big, great. So the Brig Sama, the big song, which is known to have a particularly exquisite melody and is sung as a glorification to the demigod in charge of the heavenly planetary system, Indra, but only when the Supreme Person himself takes that position. The Gayatri mantra, what we commonly call the Gayatri mantra is actually the Brahma Gayatri, and there are many different Gayatri mantras, but the main Gayatri mantra is common knowledge for those of us who are into that sort of thing. However, I would like to make a note here that that mantra is especially meant for God realization and therefore represents the Supreme Lord. However, it is actually intended to be chanted by people who have made some advancement along the path of yoga. In order for the Gayatri mantra to actually have any real effect, the chanter has to be qualified by having elevated their consciousness into the mode of goodness, the material mode of goodness. That mode of goodness is kind of the launch pad into transcendence. So you have to first put your rocket on the launch pad in order for the mantra to fire the rockets that are going to take you into a transcendental orbit. So there are three qualities of material nature: goodness, passion, and ignorance. And just by way of quick review, goodness is characterized by purity and illumination, by knowledge and the pursuit of knowledge for the sake of knowledge, clarity of thought, detachment from material stuff, and the result of being in the mode of goodness is you have that platform, you have that launch pad for the elevation of consciousness and ultimately sustainable happiness. The mode of passion is born of hankering. It's characterized by a distortion of intelligence due to intense desire for material stuff, attachment to the results of one's actions. And the result of being situated in the mode of passion is you develop a sense of greed, anxiety about getting things or keeping what you've got. And ultimately, your spiritual progress is stalled out and you become miserable. The mode of ignorance is characterized, is born of delusion, is characterized by insanity, apathy, laziness. And the result of being influenced by the mode of ignorance is foolishness, also belligerence, causeless violence towards other people. So elevating oneself so that one can chant and get some result from this sound incarnation of Brahman, of transcendence, the Gayatri mantra, is what's required. And therefore, the aspiring yogi should be focused first on developing these good qualities. The yamas and niyamas are the guidelines of universal morality that allow one to elevate one's consciousness, purify one's heart to the point of being in the mode of goodness and therefore qualified to chant this mantra. And here we are in April, and it's springtime. The flower-bearing spring makes everybody hopeful and joyful. Therefore, Krishna is the season of spring. Text 36. And this is actually where we're going to stop. I see that we only have a couple of minutes left, and rather than try to blow through the details of these last couple of verses, I am going to include the details of these verses in our class after next class. Why am I saying that? Well, I will explain in just a moment. Meanwhile, let's go back to our PowerPoint presentation. And here's a chart. And I'm going to explain this chart to you in detail, but not next time. This time, what we have covered is Krishna as the best or the essential thing of various categories, continuing with his description of himself. We spoke extensively about Krishna as being feminine qualities. And next time, we will cover morality, victory, silence, and wisdom. So we will include verses 36, 37, and 38 when we wrap up the chapter in 2 weeks. And if you have any questions about what we have covered this evening, now would be a great time to ask them. Meanwhile, you're probably asking the question, well, what is Hari talking about there? Why not next week? Why 2 weeks? Well, I'll be here. You can write to me at hari@harikirtan.com if you come up with a question for this section after the fact, or if you were watching the replay of this. Meanwhile, next time, we're going to do something a little different. I'm going to have a special guest, Shivani Howe, and she is going to converse with me about the Bhagavad-gita to give us an opportunity to see the Bhagavad-gita through different eyes, by which I mean a different lineage. We have been speaking from the position of the Vaishnava lineages or Sampradayas, and Shivani is the leader of a community out in the Canadian Rockies, a intentional spiritual community, and her lineage is connected to Swami Shivananda. Swami Shivananda is coming through a different line. And we're going to have a discussion about karma yoga and bhakti yoga and the relationship of the two. We're going to talk about karma yoga and meditation, and we're going to talk about what it's like to live in a spiritual community, and what are the attractions and also the hesitations people have about making a commitment to live in an intentional spiritual community. Having been a veteran of several intentional spiritual communities, all under one umbrella, I can relate to this particular issue. So we're going to look at how one sees the Bhagavad-gita in general, and the 10th chapter of the Bhagavad-gita in particular, through the lens of a different sampradaya, so a little bit of comparative yoga philosophy, and talk about how one acts on the basis of these teachings, from seeing it from that different lens and from the perspective of making a full-time commitment to living in an intentional spiritual community. So that's going to be something a little different from our usual fare, and I am looking forward to having that conversation with Shivani and sharing that conversation with you. Last call for questions for this evening. All right. Thank you very, very much for being here with me this evening. As always, I'm very, very grateful for the fact that you choose to spend some of your time with me here to discuss the topics of transcendental knowledge as presented by Krishna in the Bhagavad-gita. It's delightful to see all of you here, and it is wonderful to know that so many of you watch or listen after the fact. So thank you very, very much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you all next week. Have a nice night.